I'm Roy Hoosier. I'm a grateful alcoholic. Glad to be here. I've been to this meeting a lot of times, but I hadn't been lately. I guess I need to get back. Uh, my sobriety date's March 15th, 1972. I have a home group, meets on Monday night. It's the Three Legacy Group. I have a sponsor. Uh, I've been sober 51 years, and I can't remember but 2 or 3 days when I did not have a sponsor. Uh, Sponsors have been a vital part of my recovery. I'm who I am and what I am because of the men in my life who've guided my life and directed my life and molded my character. I'm on my sixth sponsor right now. The previous five are deceased. Uh, every one of these men contributed to my sobriety and contributed to my uh, learning how to live properly in the Alcoholics Anonymous. Two of the men were outstanding. Two of the guys probably did more for building my character than even my parents did. One of the guys was a man by the name of Bryant Bivens. Bryant was my sponsor for over 20 years. Bryant's sobriety date was Christmas Day, 1960. And Bryant burned into my brain that I must continue to change. He said it doesn't matter how long you've been sober or how old you are, you must continue to change if you want to continue to receive the fruits of this fellowship. Now, I've been sober a long time, and my personal experience has proven to me that every time I give up old ideas, my life has always been better than it was before. So I embrace change. I look for ways to change. I want my life to be better. One of the things I've done in the last several years is I've ceased fighting anything or anybody. I walk away from conflict. I found I'd rather be happy than right. Now, I'm not perfect, of course not. I make mistakes and have slips. A few months ago, a man cut me off in traffic, and the old Roy emerged, and I said some things about his mother that I shouldn't have said. And then the thought crossed my mind that, Roy, you can't afford this. This is not the way you want to live. And so I said, God, that old boy's in a hurry. Why don't you keep him safe till he gets wherever he's going? And at that point, the anger went away, and I once more was happy and content. Another thing that I do every night before I go to bed, I share my daily inventory with 7 other guys. We do it by group text. One of the men is in Arizona, one's in Missouri, 3 of the guys in Texas, 2 are in Tennessee, and I'm in North Carolina. And every night before I go to bed, I ask myself, today was I selfish or dishonest? And if I was, what did I do about it at the time? Did I do something today that required an amend? And did I make that amend at once, as the book says? If I couldn't make that amend today, is it on the agenda for tomorrow? First thing. Then I turn my thoughts to someone I can help. Now, I sponsor a lot of guys, so I can come up with a person pretty quick. I put all this into a text and I send it out to 7 other men, and they send me theirs. And I've learned a lot of ways that I can change my life by reading how 7 other men live their life. I'll give you an example. One of the fellows said a few months ago, he said that instead of listening to what somebody had to say in the meeting, he was thinking about what he was going to say when it came his turn. And I said, I do that. So I quit. And today I listen to what you have to say in the meeting. And when it comes my turn, I let God put into my mouth what he wants you to hear. It's an amazing thing. And the second benefit from that is that it keeps me aware throughout the day of my behavior and actions. Because the night before I go to bed, I have to be accountable to 7 other men. Now, the second man that was instrumental in my sobriety is a guy by the name of Tom Ivister. Tom died last year. He had 65 years sobriety. In the last couple of years, he was in a Alzheimer's unit, and he didn't even know who he was. But he was an amazing human being, most inspirational human being I ever met. He sobered up in the penitentiary in Michigan. He was doing 5 to 15 for involuntary manslaughter. Ran over 2 kids and killed them in a blackout. He got sober in that penitentiary. He got parole, came back to North Carolina, and by a strange quirk got hired by the Department of Corrections in North Carolina. He worked for 39 years, and he was warden twice. It's impossible to go from inmate to warden, and Tom was warden twice. It makes no difference where I go in this country. When people find out I'm from North Carolina, they'll ask me if I know Tom I. When I tell them I do, they begin to tell me how he changed their life. A remarkable human being. To travel with him at a convention or a conference is a chore. It takes an hour and a half to cross a hotel lobby with people coming up and introducing themselves and shaking his hand and thanking him for what he's done for them. And some of them he don't even know. There are people in this country who quit drinking, got sober, changed their life listening to his tapes. I loved him, and God knows I miss him. I miss him every day. Now, I had my first drink when I was 16 years old, sitting in a car with 2 friends. Both those guys ordered Miller High Life, and so I ordered a Miller High Life. And the reason I ordered a Miller High Life is I didn't know any other brands. I came from a family that didn't drink. They told us it was bad, and I knew nothing about drinking. I sat there in that car and drank beer with those guys that night, and 2 things happened. One, for the first time in my life, I felt a part of. I had been an outsider all my life, outside looking in, never fit anywhere I was. And that night I was part of the world. The second thing that happened to me that night is, and I think it was subconsciously, but I realized that alcohol was my solution. It made all the bad vibes go away. And as our book says, I pursued it almost to the gates of insanity or death. I went to college after I got out of service. And after I got out of college, I started a 45 or 50-year career in sales. If I lived my life over again, I'd pick the same occupation I picked this time because I think I enjoyed every day of it. One of the first jobs I had, I worked 21 states. I sold school buses. I was a regional manager for the South and the West for a bus manufacturer, and I had factory sales reps and distributors and everywhere I went. And I was gone all the time. I left early on Monday and I came back late on Friday. And if I happened to be on the West Coast, I spent the weekend out. Sometimes I'd be gone 2 or 3 weeks at a time. And it was in the 60s, and the 60s were a drinking society. It was a time of the 3 martini lunches and the happy hour that began at 4 and lasted till 7. And I not only became a daily drinker, I became an all-day daily drinker. I drank from the time I got up to the time I went to bed. And every Friday night when I came home, I was drunk. And the weekends were always trouble. And every Monday morning on the way to the airport, I promised myself that this week I'm going to stay sober. I'm going to stay sober all week. I'm going to go home Friday night sober. I'm going to stay sober over the weekend. I'm going to be a husband and a father and a friend and a neighbor. And I'm not going to do what I did the last time. I realized that. I wanted to do that. That's what I wanted to do. I remember sitting in an airplane seat at 7:30 in the morning, looking at 2 drinks on the tray in front of me, and realizing for the first time in my life that I could not drink. I'd spent the previous hour promising myself to stay sober, and here I am looking at 2 drinks that I've ordered. I was 30 years old and I was hooked. The next emotion that comes around is what the hell's the use? Let me turn this off. Now we got it. What the hell's the use? One of the first things I related in the book Alcoholics Anonymous was that passage that said we were on a merry-go-round and couldn't get off. When I read that, I knew exactly what it was talking about. I knew what it meant to be on a merry-go-round and couldn't get off. In 1968, the vice president of a competitive bus manufacturer approached me, and he knew my sales and marketing or sales and management skills, but he didn't know anything about my drinking. He said, Roy, what would it take to get you to go to work for us? And I named a price, and he hired me. This company was out of Arkansas. They had an assembly plant in Texas, and they were building an assembly plant in Pennsylvania. And they hired me to be sales manager of the plant in Pennsylvania. And we moved to Pennsylvania and nothing changed. Same thing, drunk, creating problems, embarrassing myself, my wife, my family, my friends. Nothing changed. But one of the first people I met up there was a man by the name of Ned Hunter. He was the general manager of a company that distributed our buses in southwestern Pennsylvania. I went down and spent the morning with him, and we went to lunch, and the girl said, what do you guys want to drink? And I said, I'll have a martini. And Ned said, I'll have an iced tea. And I thought, this guy doesn't drink at lunch. I had ceased associating with people who didn't drink at breakfast, but he didn't drink. I felt like, well, probably he doesn't drink when he's working. I was down there one Monday and one day, and I mentioned the fact that there was a big convention over in Philadelphia the next weekend, and I said, I'm going down a day early and set up a hospitality suite. And Ned said, you want me to go along 10 bar? And I said, sure. He came to Philadelphia, stayed up till 2 o'clock in the morning, told stories, told jokes, laughed, had more fun than anybody there, and didn't take a drink. Somebody told me that Ned used to drink, but he doesn't drink anymore. And that's all I knew. A few months later, we were on an airplane going down to Little Rock to the home office. And the girl comes down the aisle with a cart, and she stops at our row and says, what do you guys want to drink? And I said, I want a bourbon and ginger ale. And Ned said, I want a bourbon and ginger ale. This caught my attention. Here's a man, I'd known him a little over a year. He used to drink, doesn't drink anymore, and he's ordering booze. But when they set the booze down on his tray, it was a little miniature bottles, and he put the booze over on my tray. Said, here, Roy, you drink the bourbon, I'll just drink the ginger ale. And I said, Ned, you don't drink at all, do you? This man had read the book Alcoholics Anonymous. He read the chapter Working with Others. And when I opened the door, he stuck his foot in. I got a 12-step call at 30,000 feet. He told me what happened to him. He never mentioned my drinking. He told me what happened to him. Told me about losing a family and a fortune and a business. And he said, Roy, I belong to an organization called Alcoholics Anonymous, and I haven't had a drink in 5 years. Now, I didn't know Alcoholics Anonymous from a Rotary Club, but I knew that was important. I knew somehow that conversation needed to be retained. And it was shortly thereafter that I got fired. Now, I'll give you a little advice. Don't ever work for anybody from Arkansas. They're narrow-minded. They're backward. If you don't work, they won't pay you. And all I did was drink, so they fired me. And we came back to North Carolina, and I went in business with my brother-in-law. It was a small company, barely able to support one family, and it couldn't support two, so I didn't stay long. Sometime in November of 1970, I came to laying on the floor. The family was gone. My belly was saying, "Why'd you do it? Why'd you do it?" And I know what I'd done. I just knew last night was bad. I was full of guilt, remorse, and shame, and I knew last night was bad, but I couldn't come up with any detail. But I remembered Ned Hunter, and I called him on the phone, and I said, "Ned, I think I have a drinking problem." Ned burst out laughing. He said, "Roy, everybody that's ever known you knows you have a drinking problem, and we're just thrilled to death that you finally found it out." And we began to talk, and he told me, he gave me the secret to life. He said, "Call Alcoholics Anonymous and do what they tell you to do. For a drunk, that's the secret to life." Now, before I go any further, let me say this. When I got sober, I kept up with Ned. And the last time I talked to him was on a Christmas Eve. And when I hung up, I told my wife he sounded like he was drunk. I couldn't find him after that. But I had some friends up in Pittsburgh, Jack and Mace, and I called them and asked them if they would find out what happened. And they reported back that Ned had 10 or 12 years sobriety and he got drunk. And he was in and out of AA, drunk, coming back for a period of time. And he was now deceased. They did not know if he was drunk or sober when he died, and they did not know the cause of death. And that's all I know. But I know this much. This man made the first 12-step call on me. He directed me into Alcoholics Anonymous. He started the process that saved my life, and I'll always be grateful to him. Ned didn't make it, but he sure did me as number one. I called AA that morning. They sent a man out to see me, and I went to my first AA meeting sometime in November of 1970. I'd been in AA meeting about 15 minutes when I knew I was home. I knew that's where I belonged. I knew that I was at home. I liked AA from the very beginning. Now, there were two parts of this program I didn't buy right off the bat. One was that God part. That other was that not drinking. Now, if you leave God and not drinking out of AA, there's not a whole lot left but coffee. And needless to say, I had a lot of trouble. For the next 16 months, the only thing I did worthwhile was return to Alcoholics Anonymous after every major drunk. But let me tell you what I learned. I learned firsthand about the insanity of this illness. I left work one Monday and with no thought whatsoever pulled into a place and drank one beer. I'd been going to AA. I was probably sober 6 weeks. I had a sponsor. Went into this place, drank one beer, left and went home, finished, cut my grass. Tuesday, I remembered on the way home that I had a beer yesterday and I didn't get drunk. And I thought, shoot, I'm probably not alcoholic. So to prove to myself that I wasn't alcoholic, I didn't drink a beer on Tuesday. Wednesday afternoon at my office, I began to think about having a beer on Monday, not getting drunk, and using my willpower on Tuesday. I said, I'd probably have a beer tonight too, it won't bother me. At that point, the obsession set in so strong, I couldn't think about anything but one beer at 5 o'clock. I left work early. I left at 4 to go get one beer. And when I left after drinking one beer, I left with a king size in a sack. And at 4:30 and on Wednesday afternoon, I got in my car with a king size beer. And the next thing I remember, it was Monday again. I was in jail, Rock Hill, South Carolina. Wonder what in the hell's going on? What's happened? And I remember when they opened that jail cell door, I thought to myself, I must be crazy. That's the first time I had ever considered insanity as one of the problems I had. Anyway, in and out. I was associating with guys just like me in there. We were taking turns getting drunk. We got tired of going to that meeting where they were telling the truth and paying their bills. And we decided we'd start our own group. And we did. It was a Sunday night discussion meeting. And the rest of the AA members in High Point wouldn't come to our group. They called it Slippers Anonymous. And we just sort of taking turns getting drunk. And we were there one Sunday night, and somebody was talking about a birthday somewhere. Somebody said, "Who's got the most sobriety here?" And we counted up, and there were 9 of us at that meeting that night, and we had 11 days sobriety between us. And I think the next night we were all drunk. But of that 9 guys, 4 died drunk, 5 of us stayed sober. Over 20 years. I'm the only one left. But on March 15, 1972, I came to laying on the floor. My belly once more was saying, "Why'd you do it? Why'd you do it?" And I knew what I'd done last night, and I didn't want to think about it. I was 35 years old, and I knew my life was over. I was unemployed, unemployable. My wife was talking to a divorce attorney. My kids were ashamed of me. I couldn't think of a single person that I could call on for help, and I didn't believe in God. We have a passage in our book that I've come to love. It says deep down in every man, woman, and child is the fundamental idea of God. And because that's true, and only because that's true, I cried out to a God I didn't believe in. I said, "God, if there's a God, I need help." In the next few minutes, everything about me changed. My life changed, my personality changed, my attitude changed, everything changed. I was suddenly enveloped in the greatest feeling of peace and serenity I've ever known in my life, like I was wrapped in a warm blanket. I knew that morning that there was a God. There always had been. It was me that was wrong. I fully accepted the fact that morning I was alcoholic and had been for years. I knew that the problems I had that morning, and then somehow knew the problems I would ever have, would be solved by the people and or the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And for over 51 years, every problem I've had been solved by the people and or the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And the beautiful thing that happened to me that morning that I didn't realize till later, the insane belief that I can successfully drink was removed. It's never returned, and I know I didn't do it. I went back to Alcoholics Anonymous that night, and I went back wanting everything this program had to offer. Now, Glenn called me and asked me to speak today, and I said yes because I don't say no. But the real reason I'm here to this morning is because I still want everything this program has to offer. I asked Joe to be my sponsor. The group took me in. I became part of something for the first time in my life. They let me read the steps and the traditions. They let me chair that meeting when I got sober enough. They took me on 12-step calls, and back then we made a lot of 12-step calls. And they told me if I was going to keep this, I had to give it away. So I started chasing drunk so I could stay sober. And when you go to the bus station and pick up an old boy and he's got everything he owns in a Georgia suitcase, he's yours. And you got to do something. And I bought him underwear and socks and motel rooms and a couple of beers to knock the shakes down, whatever it took, so that I could stay sober. And we had this minister moved into town, and he said that God sent him down to open up a halfway house or a recovery facility, and he rented a big old house, had a lot of rooms, and the only recovery program I ever knew the man to have was he had prayer in the morning and prayer at meals, but he took care of drunks. He'd take them. He didn't care who they were, how many times they'd been there. He kept them fed. He kept them clothed. He kept them clean. He gave them a bed to sleep in, kept them warm. And he'd take a drunk. One guy beat him up one morning, and he let him back in there that night. Amazing human being. And all of his money came from church contributions. He called me one night and he said he had a meeting with the church and he thought he might get a contribution. He said, Roy, Rudy's in DTs and I need somebody to sit with him. Well, everybody in town knew Rudy. Rudy was a town drunk, I think. But Rudy, let me tell you, that Rudy died sober. But I went in there and Rudy was laid in a bed, had a blanket pulled up to his chin, and he was seeing rats or snakes. I don't know what I couldn't see them, but every now and then he'd scream, point at something he was seeing. So I got a chair and a fly swatter and sat down beside of his bed. And he'd point out something he was seeing. I'd take that fly swatter and hit wherever he was pointing, and whatever he was seeing would go away. And so I sat there all night and beat the boogers off Rudy. And somewhere in the wee hours of the morning, it became important to me that Rudy get well. I was no longer there for me. I was there to help somebody else get well. First time in my life, I cared more for somebody else than I did for myself. Not one time since then have I gone out to help a drunk so I can stay sober. I have my sobriety. I'm sincerely interested in yours. After I'd been sober about 18 months, I went back on the road selling. I got a job with one company and I worked for them for 5 years. They took a chance on me because nobody else would. After I'd been there 5 years, I left and I went to work for another company, and I've stayed with that company for 20 years. They hired me as a sales rep, and I retired from that company after 20 years as Southern District Manager. I could have stayed, but they sold the company, and I knew the people bought it, and I wouldn't work for them. So after I left them, I set up my own business. I ran it for 18 years. A manufacturer's rep. I had plywood out of China and chair frames out of Quebec and a lot of different lines, and sold a lot of stuff to a lot of people. I got 80 years old and I decided that company was interfering with my golf game, and so I closed the company. But life's been good to me. I made it a point when I got sober that, and I went back on the road, that if I was out of town overnight, I'd find a AA meeting to go to. And I made a lot of meetings. I met a lot of people. I have a host of friends all over this country. I've been fortunate. AA gave me back everything that I threw away or destroyed before I came in here, and more. Life's been good to me. Now, there's an old saying that into every life some rain shall fall. And it's true with me. We've had some dark days. In 1958, I was in the military in Europe. And that year was a civil uprising in Lebanon. And the Lebanese government appealed to the United States for assistance. And Eisenhower sent the military into Lebanon to help quell the uprising. I was in Beirut in 1958, and it was not pretty. When I came home, occasionally I'd wake up at night hearing gunfire. And it didn't happen that often. I recognize it as flashbacks. It was not really a serious problem. When I came into AA and I took my 4th and 5th step inventory, I didn't put my combat experience down because I couldn't talk about it. I didn't even want to think about it. And a few years later, it all came back, and it came back with a vengeance. And I'd wake up at night hearing gunfire, smelling blood, smelling gunpowder, smelling the stink of war, and seeing the faces of the people that I killed. And I was terrified. It was a fear like I've never known. It paralyzed me. I couldn't even think. I couldn't tell my wife what was happening. I like to drove the poor lady crazy. Bryant Bivens was my sponsor. Bryant sat me down in a chair and dared me to get up until I told him what was happening in my life. And after 30 years, I was able to finally tell somebody what I did, what we did, and what I saw. And we began to work on fears. And I soon realized that I had never faced a fear in my entire life. I either ran from them or stuffed them. And Bryant pulled fears out of me like pulling weeds out of a garden. It took us almost a year to work through that. I was finally able to come to terms with it. I could accept the fact that what I did was my job, and what we did saved a lot of American lives. But I still couldn't talk about it. And Bryant died, and Tom became my sponsor. Tom reminded me that he ran over those two kids and killed them in a blackout. And he said, Roy, it's never going to turn you loose when you start sharing it. And the more you talk about it, the less of a hold it'll have on you. So I took a chance, and I told some of my close AA friends and some of my golf buddies, but I couldn't tell my wife. I didn't know how Peggy would take what I had to do. And finally I got to the point I couldn't take it anymore. It was about to eat me alive. I got 2 cups of coffee, and I went out in the sunroom, and I said, Peggy, come here, I got to tell you a story. And I told her the whole story, every bloody detail. And when I got through, I was exhausted. And my wife said, honey, I'm so sorry you had to go through that. And I was free. I'm still free. Now, the faces still come back in times of stress or under any kind of fear. I still get the faces. But I've learned how to turn them off, and they don't haunt me like they did before. A few years ago, I had a son who was in a horrible car wreck. They had to tear the car apart to get him out, and they had to airlift him to the hospital. I was 100 miles away. I had to drive that 100 miles not knowing if my son was dead or alive. And all I could do was pray, God, give me what I need to make it through what I've got to go through with. I don't know what it is, but give me what I need. Fortunately, that boy came through that. It took a while, but he's alive today. As a matter of fact, he just retired. He'd been in aviation for 40 years, and he finally retired. A few years ago, I had a grandson out in Kansas City. And they called us and told us that Jack was involved in drugs and alcohol and living in an abandoned house. I went out to Kansas City and I said, Jack, somewhere, somehow, this disease jumped generations. And I want you to know that you have the same thing I have. And I want you to know that I've lived with it a long time, and so can you. And I called downtown Kansas City to the central office, and I found the groups where the young kids go. And I said, Jack, go to these meetings, listen to these kids, and do what they tell you, and you'll be okay. But Jack wouldn't go back. And a few weeks later, they called us to tell us Jack had hanged himself. Now, through all this pain and all this turmoil, I never thought about taking a drink. I'm the same man that sat in that airplane seat all those years ago, wanting to stay sober and could not. And I go through all this pain, and I don't think about taking a drink. What's the difference? The difference is the power of the people in this fellowship. People who loved me and held me up when I couldn't stand. The difference is the power of this program and the steps. The difference is the power of God as I understand Him working in my life. That combination of the people, the program, and God as I understand Him changed me from what I was to what I am today and what I'm capable of becoming tomorrow. And that same combination, the people, the program, God as I understand Him, and you, the ones of you who have touched my life, have truly made me a grateful alcoholic. Grateful that there's such a thing as Alcoholics Anonymous, and grateful that you allow me to be a part of it. I thank you for that. I love you. God bless you.